So we're going to start a section on healthy weight management, and we're going to start with kind of the big picture of the obesity epidemic. We talked last class about America's Health Rank and how this has become such a challenge in the past 30 years. And it's something that's really relevant in terms of our country right now. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about it. And then we'll move into more personal weight management, how we can maintain a healthy body weight. I want to start very quickly with some definitions. So when I say the term overweight or obese, what are we talking about? So typically we use body mass index criteria, or BMI. Now, we know that BMI is actually not the best measure to use, and we'll talk about why a little bit later in this lesson. But when we're talking about measuring populations of people, countries of people, states, we use body mass index measures because they're very easy to obtain. All you need is height and weight. We can typically get that from medical records, and then you know a BMI. Okay, so we use it for convenience. So overweight is a BMI of 25 to 30. Obesity is a BMI of greater than 30. The term obesogenic means an environment promotes obesity in some way. Maybe that's increased food intake, unhealthy food, physical inactivity. I think all of us would agree that the United States is an obesogenic environment. Typical college life can be obesogenic. Think about it. You do a lot of sitting, right? You sit when you're studying, you sit when you're in class, maybe you sit when you're hanging out with your friends. You have all you can eat food in the pit, right? So college can be a very obesogenic environment. So we want to think about how do we maintain a healthy body weight even while we're in college. So we talk about obesity kind of as a US problem sometimes, but we have to understand that actually about 30% of the world's population is either overweight or obese. So this isn't just a US problem, it's certainly a global epidemic. But we typically do have the highest obesity numbers. Here's one set of data. Now, data is going to differ based on what study we look at, but this is one that was done in 2017. And this says the percentage of total adult population that is obese. And this estimates the US to have about 38.2% of the adult population classified as obese. So some interesting maps come from the CDC, and these started with a study they did starting in 1990. So take a look at the obesity trends in 1990. If you take a look at this, we actually didn't have any states greater than 14% obese. We had quite a few that were still less than 10% obese. So in 1990, doing pretty good, right? So let's fast forward to 1995. Now we have quite a few states between 15 and 19%. 2000, we actually see our first states above 20% obese. We still have Colorado hanging on there between 10 and 14%. 2004, you see your first states above 25%. 2006, this was an interesting year. Look at West Virginia and Mississippi. We actually had to add a new color because they were over 30% obese starting in 2006. 2008, we see more of those states above 30%. 2009, even more. 2010, we finally even lose Colorado, right? So what's the difference between 1990 and 2010? So we kind of have to ask ourselves, like, what happened? And we're going to come back to that question in a few minutes, but start to think about what really happened in those 20 years for obesity rates to skyrocket. So let's fast forward to recent data. So this is 2017. The colors are a little bit different. Information is very similar. So to break this down for us. So all states have more than 20% of adults with obesity. 7 states actually have 35% or more of their adults with obesity. Now, those states are Alabama, Arkansas, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. Does anything ring a bell as we name those states? Those are some of our lowest ranking states, right? When we look at last class, we talked about America's Health Rank. Those are the states that ranked the lowest. Obesity plays a big role in our overall health and not just our physical health. So what about our kids? So we hear a lot about childhood obesity. It's something we're certainly trying to combat in this country. But nearly 20% of children are obese. 1 in 10 preschoolers are obese. And then children who are obese before the age of 18 have a very, very low potential to become a healthy weight adult. And we're going to talk about physiologically why that is. But again, one of the greatest predictors of adulthood obesity is actually obesity in childhood. So we want to look at, remember, the wellness wheel. We always want to come back to this wheel, and we want to think about how does obesity affect these areas. Typically, we think about physical, right? So we think about things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and respiratory issues, arthritis and the pressure that it puts on the bones and the joints, things like hormonal imbalance, reduced immune function, reduced function and activity of daily living, right? So there's certainly physical effects. I want to talk about that last bullet point for just a second. So what do I mean by that? Reduced function and activities of daily living. So think about things that a normal weight adult does every day and probably takes very much for granted. Things like walking up and down stairs, or stepping over a curb, or getting in and out of a car, or picking something up off the floor, or tying their shoes, like very simple things, right? Become incredibly difficult when somebody is obese. So that actually starts to impact their emotional health and their social health because it reduces the quality of life. It might lead to a negative self-image, maybe some discrimination and depression, potentially social isolation, and overall reduced quality of life. In terms of occupational health, we do see some discrimination in the workplace. You sometimes see lower wages, you see higher insurance premiums, and that certainly spills into financial. So again, anytime that we think about a health issue, we want to say, how does it affect the wellness wheel entirely, right? More than just compartmentalizing it to physical, how does it affect one's overall health and their ability to kind of obtain full health? Looking at childhood obesity, this is a really interesting diagram. So I've highlighted a few things here. So the real issue with childhood obesity is that kids are starting to get diseases that we shouldn't see for many, 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 many years. Think midlife to late life. Things like risk for stroke and hypertension, which is high blood pressure, or risk of heart disease, or type 2 diabetes, or degenerative joint disease. Like, these are things we should not see in children, but because of this obesity epidemic, we're seeing these. Type 2 diabetes is a prime example. For many, many years, we actually called that adult onset diabetes. We didn't see it in kids. But now, because of lifestyle choices, because of the obesity epidemic, we can't call it adult onset anymore because we're starting to see it in kids. So we've changed the name to type 2 diabetes. Another thing to think about is how much obesity costs, right? So these are some estimates that we spend about $180 to $190 billion a year on obesity, whether that's direct medical costs or indirect medical costs. But the behaviors of the people in our country are having an impact. They're having an impact economically and financially on the health of our country. So a really good question to ask ourselves is, what is behind the obesity epidemic? What changed in our country between 1990 and now that this obesity epidemic has really boomed? Take a minute to think about that. Think beyond the obvious. You know, people aren't eating well, or not exercising. What else? What has shifted in our culture to really create this obesity epidemic?